But I'm going to start with two super exciting highlight pieces. This week was the deadline for passage of substantive legislation from the House over to the Senate. And we had two of my three priority pieces of legislation made it out. I've requested a deadline extension on the third piece because things just got a little too terse between the two sides of the aisle. But the two pieces that passed, I was actually told repeatedly were impossible to pass. So I'll take the impossible first, no problem. For the last 3 years, I've been working with a bipartisan, really, really inclusive coalition of advocates and experts to attempt to implement a more fair, more just, more thoughtful, more logic-based approach to low-level cannabis possession in the state of Illinois.
Low-level cannabis possession?
Cannabis possession.
Oh,
so possession,
cannabis.
yeah, possession of marijuana under 15 grams, which is about half of a Ziploc baggie. And there were several points along the way when it seemed like that was going nowhere. You know, it's always tough to ask people who are up on the ballot every 2 years to take a vote that could be construed as soft on crime. But you know, over the course of these 2 or 3 years, where we've had meetings, we've had meetings with police and prosecutors and advocates and court clerks and academics and, you know, really the entire spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, you know, having really, really thoughtful conversations where everyone's opinion was valued and considered and everyone's bottom line need was taken into account, resulted in a very successful coalition. And we passed the impossible bill with 62 votes on Thursday. 5-day weeks in Springfield get confusing. You have trouble remembering what day it is. So we were able to pass that over to the Senate. The bill will mandate a statewide ticket system. So no longer will there be, will someone with less than 15 grams of marijuana on their person be subject to arrest statewide. So prior to this, there were over 100 municipal ordinances in place around possession. Some of them went up to 30 grams. Some of them had no quantity specified, which was fascinating. Some of them had fines as low as $10. Some of them had fines up into the many, many hundreds of dollars. There was really no rhyme or reason, no consistency. I was fascinated to see that some of the first fines, some of these first ticket ordinances came into play in the late 60s, 1967, 68, and 69. The first ones came into play. And they are all over the state. But what that system created, that patchwork system of local ordinances and discretionary ticketing plans, schemes, meant that it depended on where you lived and what you looked like, whether or not you were going to be arrested or ticketed. And very often that meant if you were black or brown living in a neighborhood in the city of Chicago, you were going to get arrested. I spoke of this on the floor. I talked about how I spoke to my sons about this bill because someone said to me, one of my colleagues said he wasn't sure how he could vote for it because he wasn't sure what kind of message he was sending to his sons. And that actually kind of got under my skin a little bit because that was suggesting that I was sending a bad message to my sons. And many of you who know me know that my kids come with me a lot. They've seen a lot. They do a lot. They've experienced more than your average 14 or 10-year-old. And I talk to them really openly about what the work I'm doing means. And this bill was no exception. And we've talked about whether or not they should use marijuana, and it's no different than using alcohol in terms of, you know, whether I want them to try it now. The answer is no. But what I explained to them about this bill is that if they were to be caught with marijuana right now, separate and apart from me killing them, they would likely get a ticket, but the boys who live next door to us would probably be arrested. And they're basic sense of fairness kicks in, and they get it. They understand what this means. And ultimately, so did 62 of my colleagues, and a coalition that included State's Attorney Alvarez, State's Attorney Bob Berlin from DuPage County, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart, the Illinois State's Attorneys Association, the ACLU of Illinois, Marijuana Policy Project, Illinois Normal, and, drum roll please, the Illinois Policy Institute, the most conservative think tank in the state. And they worked hard to help us pass this bill. They were very instrumental in delivering a lot of those more conservative votes, from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans alike. And I think that reflects where things are moving with criminal justice reform generally. I don't think this bill would have passed without the many years of work and the inclusive coalition work that led up to this year. But what's different this year is this opportunity from the more conservative perspective to look at criminal justice reform, frankly, through a fiscal lens, and recognizing that we have limited criminal justice resources, and should we be putting people in jail because we are mad at them, or should we be putting the people in jail that we are afraid of? And I'm getting big nods from our visiting friend from the Department of Corrections. We've got the Deputy Chief of Parole for our district over here, and I'm glad he's going to be here because he might help with some of our questions later on. Our prison system has become ridiculously crowded with folks that could be better served in other ways. And the one thing about this new governor that I am embracing, it's not the only thing, but the thing I am most embracing of, it is the attitude he has come in with towards criminal justice reform and some of the opportunities that presents. For years, I've been talking about sentencing reform and reentry reform. And when I started to get Republican support for these issues, I always said I don't care. And it was almost always around the reasoning being for fiscal reasons. And I always said, I don't care why you come to my party as long as you dance. I don't care if they want to get on board with a criminal justice reform agenda for fiscal reasons rather than human rights reasons, social justice reasons. As long as we're at the same party and dancing together, it's all good with me. And I think that speaks to how we were able to pass House Bill 218 this year. It heads over to the Senate now, where its prospects are great. The Senate has always been a more progressive body than the House. The heavy lift was on the House side. So I have a lot of confidence heading into the rest of this session for that bill. The other bill that was impossible to pass, that we passed with 66 votes, was House Bill 494, which was another fabulously quirky coalition that included the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, the Community Renewal Society, Shriver Center, Heartland Alliance, and again, the Illinois Policy Institute. In fact, it's one of the most fabulous group photos ever because the guy from the Policy Institute kind of has this befuddled look on his face as we're all celebrating after passage. There are three categories of employment in Illinois where there are what are known as lifetime bars to employment. So within school systems, park districts, actually four, but one, the way it's written doesn't affect anybody, transit, and healthcare. I picked up the school system bill, the education bill this year, because it was seen as the hardest one. If we could get over that hurdle, we could get over any hurdle. Because the immediate knee-jerk reaction to someone when you talk about ex-felons working in school systems, they flash to the worst-case scenario. What this bill does do is allow folks with certain nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors in their past, drug-related crimes, other nonviolent crimes, to be honest about their background when applying for a job, tell their whole story, and be evaluated at face value by the decision maker at the local level and offered a job or not on their merits. The law as it was written prevented that very simple exchange of information and ideas between the employer and the potential employee. So we have, through passage of this bill, over to the Senate, where again it has pretty good prospects. We've put the decisions back in the hands of the school systems, so that, you know, one of the witnesses I worked with, who told his story so beautifully and so eloquently, you know, he spent time in IDOC, got his associate's degree while he was there, and made a decision about what kind of life he wanted to lead when he came out. Owns his past fully, owns the mistakes he's made fully. In June, he's going to graduate from the University of Chicago, thank you, with a master's in social work.
Awesome.
And a dream of keeping other kids from doing the same thing. He wants to be a school social worker. Absent passage of this bill, that dream is impossible for him. I plan on being at his graduation, hopefully with a signed bill, because I can't think of anyone better to work in some of our communities and in our schools than someone who can share the mistakes, share their experiences, and help show that there are options. There are choices beyond what you see at the end of your block. And this doesn't mandate hiring. This doesn't mandate preference. This merely allows a fully informed decision on the behalf of a potential employer and a potential employee. But again, that was one that was suggested that it was impossible to pass. It was never going to pass. I don't know why you're doing this, Cassidy. You're out of your mind. You know, you're putting all these bills that are never going to pass on your priority list. Don't you want to make laws? Yes, I do. I want to make good laws. I want to make laws that are going to change lives. That's why I'm down there. So those were two big wins for us this week. It was a pretty exciting week. And honestly, looking up into the gallery at the folks whose lives will be impacted by this after the bill passed. First of all, the whole chamber erupted in applause, and that's, you know, we all support each other. We all are happy for each other, even when we disagree. We know how hard we work on our bills. But when I looked up into the gallery and saw these folks who were just so completely overwhelmed with relief and joy, it was one of those moments of, this is why I get up in the morning and drive 3.5 hours to Springfield to keep doing this work. It does, you know, this will make a huge difference in people's lives. And one of the things I've always said is a barrier to reentry is a path to recidivism. The differences in recidivism rates between people with work and without work are stunning. Recidivism rates when you have a job are roughly 15%, and they jump well into the high 50s, 60s, 70s, depending on your category of crime, if you don't have a job. It's amazing the difference something as simple as the ability to work makes. Not just on your soul, on yourself, on how you feel about the world. Those reentry bills that I work on are incredibly meaningful to me, and this one in particular. And as we move on, now that we've passed this one, we have a model to work from as we look towards the healthcare and the Park District bills. We worked very closely with the State Board of Education. We got agreement from them on the bill. We went from, you know, not just no, but hell no, to how can we work together? How can we find some common ground? And we worked it out. We worked it out in a really complicated coalition building way, because the group that came together originally to craft the bill were committed to having the leaders, the community people who were affected by the bill, involved in the process at every step of the way. And I'm really glad that we did it that way. There were times when it made it challenging because we couldn't make decisions in a vacuum. You know, we would always go back and speak to the affected individuals and ask them how they felt about this and what this would mean. And but it was so rewarding ultimately because there was such huge buy-in and such ownership on everyone's part, because the process was so inclusive. So it was really a very exciting process to be a part of. So those two are good. Some of the other criminal justice bills that are moving through right now, we hit a bit of a barrier, not on one of my bills, on a bill sponsored by Representative Elaine Nekritz that I've been working on with her. It's coming through the committee I chair, the Juvenile Justice and System Involved Youth Committee, which seeks to reform the laws around automatic transfer of juveniles to adult court. Currently, there are many categories that can get a juvenile charged as an adult. Some are fairly easy to see or, to wrap your head around. Murder, criminal sexual assault, some of the more heinous crimes, folks, can pretty easily understand a reason for that. Not everyone agrees that it should exist, but that's one where, there's less gray area. But in other cases, there's a lot more gray area. And what the bill sought to do was make these transfers all discretionary, so that before a juvenile could be transferred to adult court, there would be a hearing before a juvenile court judge to determine whether the factors of the crime, the juvenile's background, their home life, their criminal history, all of those things, whether adult court was warranted or whether they could be better served in juvenile court. Again, this was a really inclusive negotiating process that involved the State's Attorneys Association, State's Attorney Alvarez, Cook County Board President Preckwinkle, and others, and they came to some substantive agreement on those categories. But we ran the clock. We ran out of time on that bill. I think that there's still opportunity as we move through the session to take some of the other categories out where it can become discretionary. There's one category in particular that we all have agreement on. As the law is currently written, there's a concept called accountability. And under accountability, whether or not the youth that is charged was actually the perpetrator of a crime, and a good example of this is a drive-by. So you've got a driver, you've got a shooter, you've got a couple of passengers. All four of them can be charged with that shooting or that murder under the concept of accountability. Right now, those are automatic transfers. That's a really good place for a judge to hear the whole story. And that's one where we were able to get agreement that those accountability cases can and should be looked at individually. So that bill continues to work its way through. We're not there yet. There's become a catchphrase has caught on in the House. When we were fighting over the concealed carry bill, I kept getting up and saying it's not soup yet. So we now hear it dropped every now and then, and I always get a wink and a nod when someone says the bill is not soup yet. But this bill is not quite soup yet. It's almost soup. It's a little soupy. So that one, hopefully we'll see some progress on that one before the end of May. There's a Supreme Court decision, again, affecting juveniles that we're going to have to address. In the Miller decision, it was held that life without parole is cruel and unusual punishment for juveniles. What was missing from that decision is whether that decision applied to folks who were already sentenced to life without parole. So we have already eliminated the possibility of life without parole for juveniles going forward, but there are about 100 juveniles in the system right now who are serving life without parole, some of them on things like accountability, that need to be addressed. So that's a bill that we're working on moving forward, looking at a way to address resentencing of those individuals in a way that's not overly burdensome on the court system, that is mindful of the impact on the families of the victims in those cases. It does not mandate that they cannot be held for life. It just means that the possibility of parole has to be back into the thought process. I put in a bill that has not advanced, but it's a concept that I'm really committed to. As we talk about all of these different criminal justice reforms, we're talking about changing sentencing around other drug laws. We're talking about changing sentencing around retail theft. We're talking about changing sentencing around, all sorts of categories. I introduced a bill and held a hearing mainly for the purposes of making sure that people were thinking about the entire picture. Because when we do these bills, they're not retroactive. And so as we move through this reform process, we need to be mindful of the fact that someone convicted on Wednesday under a new law leaves behind someone convicted on Tuesday under the old scheme. And so as we move through the criminal justice reform process, and in particular under the Governor's Commission on Criminal Justice Reform, which I'll get to in a minute, I want us to be mindful of who we're leaving behind. In particular, if our goal really is to have an impact on the population in IDOC and in the local jails, the governor's mandate is to reduce IDOC population by 25% over the next 10 years. You know, we're not going to do that just by moving forward. We need to do that by looking at the entire population. A bill sponsored by one of my favorite Republican legislators, and one of the few who stood up and spoke in favor of House Bill 218, the cannabis bill, was John Cabello, and it was a particularly bold move of him to stand up and speak to this bill because he's a cop, and you know the police were the only ones who didn't come on board fully on the marijuana bill. They held back. So this was a huge step for him to come out. He has been a great partner and ally on reentry bills and on reform bills with me because he gets the system. He has lived and worked in it his entire career, and he knows what we do well and what we don't do well. We don't always agree on what falls into what category there, but we always agree that there's room. And so he put in and passed out a bill that now goes to the Senate that allows folks who get their GED either at the jail level or at the prison level, other good time credits that they get at the jail level or at the state level. So sometimes think you spend a lot of time at county before you go to IDOC. Any of the things you do there don't necessarily translate to good time credit for you when you get to IDOC. You sometimes start from scratch. This bill will make sure not only that those good time credits come into play, but also that if you complete certain things like your GED or other educational mandates or other educational accomplishments, you're also eligible to petition for early sealing of your record, which helps you move forward with your education. And then finally, a bill from Representative Duncan, which is a really thoughtful bill and a good one, House Bill 169, also going over to the Senate, deals with the destruction of arrest records in cases of mistaken identification. And I hear from folks a lot who, you know, have an old arrest record. They maybe even forgot about it until they tried to get a job or get a license, where they were just picked up. They weren't the guy. They were never charged. They just got scooped up. Thought it was gone because it was arrest. I was never convicted. This facilitates the destruction of those records in a timely and automatic fashion in cases of mistaken identification. And I want to go back real quick to the cannabis bill. One of the key pieces of that cannabis bill for me was ensuring that there were no collateral consequences for people who got tickets for those low-level possession cases. Very often, what you'll see is, you know, the classic youthful indiscretion. You know, a young person gets picked up on a possession case that follows them for the rest of their life. It impacts your ability to apply for financial aid. It impacts your ability to apply for a job. It can impact your ability to get an apartment or a professional license. These tickets are automatically expunged. You pay your ticket, it's destroyed. Simple. And so that will have lifelong effects on folks moving forward. I'm going to pause here for questions about the legislative pieces before we go on to budget, because I feel like I've been just going on and on. So does anybody have any questions about anything I've covered so far?
Just a practical question. What happens if you can't pay the ticket?
There will be a judgment entered, a civil judgment entered against you. There's no criminal case that follows that. So if you can't pay the ticket, there's a civil judgment against you. Within the law, within the bill as it's currently written, there's very specific language that allows municipalities to have their own ticket system that is inclusive of things like community service. Because some of the local ordinances were inclusive of community service in lieu of fines. That wasn't something that we could really mandate on a state level. It would be too cumbersome to try to mandate on a state level, but it's a thoughtful thing and a good concept for the locals to incorporate. Yes?
What's the name of the bill that uses hiring restrictions in certain sectors?
It's House Bill 494, and it's lifetime barriers to reentry. Sure. Yes?
Yes, you mentioned lifetime barrier to reentry and that there are 4 categories which carry that. You mentioned one of them was transportation. I could see where healthcare and schools might be a kind
enough, the transit bill is the one with the least impact on anyone because first of all, these have been in place for many, many years. And I was not able to really find the motivation, dig back far enough into the legislative history to find out how these all came to be or who picked what sectors. The transit bill is written in such a way it doesn't really impact the CTA. It only covers the CTA, but they're not prohibited because it only comes into play if the CTA were to ever privatize, which makes no sense. So the bill is moot on its face, but and the CTA is really a leader on reentry programs anyway. They've done a fantastic job of creating this wonderful internship program where folks come in and you start out cleaning cars, and folks have moved up into supervisory roles through this program. So the CTA is actually a wonderful working model of how a reentry program can work well. It should work better. There should be more of it, but they have been a great partner.
Follow up, if I may.
Yeah.
What's the cost? First place, how many people have we in Illinois currently got locked up in the state system? And number two, what's the cost of keeping a person in prison over the space of a year?
So our population's in the high 40,000s now.
A little over 47,000.
47,000 now, and I can't remember the cost. It's like $250 a day or something like that. A little bit more, and the locals, the county jail hovers around 9,000, and sometimes higher. They go, and then it's $143 a day at the county level, and a lot of those folks in county are state folks either on parole violations or awaiting trial who sometimes serve their entire sentence at county.
So it's cheaper to send a person to an Ivy League college than it is to.
Absolutely, and in fact, there have been some bills introduced to that effect. And ironically enough, I mean, you see that also in some of the housing areas of housing activism. It's cheaper to give somebody an apartment than to keep them in various shelter care and community care programs, and they work. States that have tried it, it works. So, yes.
Kelly, just in regard to that, since Governor Rauner is doing this to save money, is there going to be money put into the community for the reentry? Because just to not have people go to prison isn't the whole thing. And what about people coming out who have served their terms?
Those are my two big questions for this process as we move forward. What are we going to do with the savings? Sometimes we need savings for savings' sake, but we need to invest in the things that will ultimately save us money while we're doing it. And that's a running battle I've been having, in fact, with the head of the Criminal Justice Information Authority. We were here last week. They have slashed the ceasefire budget painfully, dramatically, outrageously, without information. So I invited the director of the agency to come up here and meet with ceasefire leaders and clients. I think he was, it certainly had an impact on him being in a room filled with folks whose lives are touched by violence every day, with folks who have dedicated their lives to really putting themselves in harm's way to prevent the violence. Many of the kids who came up from other communities, I didn't know what to expect because I tossed that challenge out with 24 hours notice, and it ended up being amazing thanks to Matt and many others who helped pull it together so quickly. But we had folks who came in from other communities who were frankly not safe coming here, coming from their territory to this territory, and we had to make sure they were escorted in safely and escorted out safely. And I think that the director, whose life doesn't involve that on a daily basis, as much as he's got real credibility on these issues. I mean, he's the former director of the John Howard Association. He's been in every prison in the state of Illinois. He certainly is not, he does not have a Pollyanna attitude towards crime. I mean, he's the real deal. But I think that was an experience for him that he didn't anticipate. We took a walk around the neighborhood. We showed him where things happened. There had been a shooting the night before. Those of us who live up here and who spend time, walking in the community, sometimes you can feel it in the air. You can feel the crackle. I had come home the night before and walked my dog, up this way and up through north of Howard, and I just knew. And sure enough, there was a shooting that night. And so he got to see that firsthand, and he got to experience it firsthand. He's not an advocate for ceasefire yet, but he heard us. When he talked about the fact that his job is to defend the governor's budget, and I responded, your job is to make the governor's budget defensible. That was that you could almost see the physical reaction to that. Even more physical was the ceasefire team from Brighton Park, where they straight up said, "You're putting dollar values on lives, and you just told me that these 3 men aren't worth it to you, that their dollar value is not sufficient for you." I followed up on that with him in our public safety appropriations hearing Thursday afternoon, because literally, when you look at the spreadsheet of their budget, they're slashing ceasefire by 60%. They're eliminating bullying prevention. They're eliminating the Franklin County meth program, which is the only downstate residential meth treatment program for juveniles. And this is not a lot of money they're moving around, but he's taken all of the money from that, about $4 million, and increased a program called Adult Redeploy. Now, let me be clear. I sponsored the creation of Redeploy Illinois. I love Redeploy Illinois. It's a great program. But what Adult Redeploy does is focuses on low-level, nonviolent offenders, incentivizing local communities to ensure that they can reduce their IDOC transfers by 25%. The way local communities do that is, you analyze who you're sending to DOC, and you pick the ones you're most likely able to keep from sending. So these programs, like the ones we do here, they revolve around things like retail theft, possession, DUI, check theft, check crime, financial crimes. Use your imagination. Think about what the people look like in that those crime categories, and the people that are affected by ceasefire. I called them out. You are valuing black and brown young lives as less valuable. Period. It's not worth the money to save those kids' lives. You sat there with those kids and you told them their lives weren't worth saving. That's not okay. Find the money somewhere else. I love Adult Redeploy. It is a great, innovative, thoughtful, functional, effective program. But don't tell me that someone's got to die to expand it, because that's not going to fly. So that's how we spent Thursday afternoon. So I didn't have a lot of time to celebrate the passage of the other 2 bills. Before we keep going on budget stuff, I don't know we made it all the way around to everyone's questions, because you got me going on a tangent that I could go for days on. Anyone else? Well, it's a good transition into the budget. So we talked a little bit about the budget process. As I have now told you, I sit on the Public Safety Appropriations Committee. It's one of my favorite committees for a lot of reasons. We touch a whole lot of the area of the state. It's not just what you would imagine. It's not just IDOC or the Criminal Justice Information Authority or the courts. It's also the Department of Labor and the Department of Transportation and many other really areas that are sort of tangentially connected to public safety. But because we have the various transit agencies, we're also dealing with the cuts to Metra and the RTA and the paratransit cuts, which every year get put on the chopping block. And every year are, again, that's some of these mind-bogglingly ridiculous discussions about, if somebody really needs paratransit and they struggle to make the $3 payment for that ride that takes 2 hours to get, that may or may not get them where they need to go, asking them for $5 to do it? What are we valuing? Where are our values and where are our priorities? So in this year's public safety appropriations budget, which we've just begun the process, it really begins in earnest next week when we get back. We've met with the new director of DOC once. I suspect we'll be meeting with him several more times before it's all said and done. Ditto with Director Mackey of the Criminal Justice Information Authority. The appropriations budget for IDOC is slated to go up. It's one of the few departments that looks like it's getting an increase, in large part because of the crowding. When we closed 2 prisons last year, 3 actually, because you count Tam's third one, right? When we closed those 3 prisons, we were already, it wasn't like we had a lot of empty beds. And so we have, we still have folks on cots in the reception center, as I understand it, in Joliet. We're off cots now? Okay. There are other prisons over the course of the years where sometimes we've had people sleeping in warehouses, sharing, 300 men with 2 bathrooms. These are aging facilities, not the best of conditions. We can reform our way down a lot, but we have to keep the inmates and the staff safe in the process. So there's got to be some balance found there. We have to restore a lot of the programming that's been eliminated. There's not enough education programming. I talked a little bit about, whether folks can get credit for what they get in county. A lot of times they sit in county for a long time. They're able to get some programming, but they don't necessarily take advantage of it because it's not going to help them with their time when they do get to DOC. We need to take away that disincentive. We need to actually implement the good time bill that we passed a few years ago, so that folks, you're like a bobblehead doll over there.
No, I mean, that's very true. Everybody in the room, my name is Deon Dixon. I'm a deputy chief in parole for Illinois Department of Corrections. That's very true. There is associated with a good time bill. If an offender, inmate rather, completes his high school diploma or gets a bachelor's degree in college, he gets up to 90 days off of his sentence. But also you're looking at good time and his adjustment and stuff like that. That's critical.
Yeah.
And then you look at the other programs that the department has been allowed to implement, the supplemental sentence credit.
Right.
Also the inmate program, which has been, very successful. We've got less than somewhere around 18 or a little bit less recidivism rate out of those programs.
Right.
The lower level offenders that are out in the community, out doing what they're supposed to do, connecting with the service providers, getting those services, they're actually employed, have a much better chance of staying out of the system.
Absolutely. You touched on something that I've talked about a lot. Those community-based programs. When we close those prisons, we also close some of the reentry centers. We can't keep cutting our nose to spite our face. We also have to be mindful that when we're cutting the public safety budget and the human services budget, we're impacting both at the same time. I mean, there's such a huge crossover and such a huge crisscross. One of the prior directors of IDOC once described to me how it was going to be okay to eliminate the drug treatment programming and some other contract that was in the budget. This is a few years ago, so I think at my very first public safety appropriations hearing. And I said, well, are you planning for more beds? What's your population plan for when those folks come back? Oh, no. The plan is that you're going to get those through services funded by human services, through the human services budget. And I you want to walk across the hall? Because I guarantee you they're talking about cutting those too. And as a result, we actually had a joint hearing of public safety and human services approach, and we've done it every year since for an opportunity to talk about that interplay. This year is going to be particularly tough. The budget as proposed is it's painful everywhere you look. And sadly, the tendency so far has seemed to be this sense of folks pitting the value of one program over another, and it's like a bunch of hungry dogs fighting over, a pile of scraps, and we can't do that. Whether we're talking about supportive housing, whether we're talking about violence prevention, whether we're talking about programming in our facilities, whether we're talking about improving our facilities, whether we're talking about the juvenile justice division, we're talking about, pick your issue and stick it here. We can't be allowed to be pitted against each other, and that's such a huge risk right now while everyone's being cut so dramatically. I talked to a couple of you as we came in about C4 closing, the community counseling centers of Chicago. They just couldn't make it through. Senator Staines and Representative Harris and I have been trying to help them get through this process for a few years now, making sure they got expedited payments, making sure as the Medicaid fee-for-service program kicked in that they could manage that billing properly, getting them additional funds where we could. And now, the idea that this massive provider in our community is no more, it's pretty terrifying to contemplate how we're going to fill that gap, how we're going to find the services for the people that depend on them. Up on Broadway, even just thinking about the day drop-in center that has made such a huge difference to people in Rogers Park and Edgewater and Andersonville and Uptown. It's a fantastic place. I'm at a loss to really respond to how we're going to deal with that. And it's only going to get worse. They're dying as a result of the FY15 budget, the fiscal year 15 budget. That we're not even talking yet about what's going to happen in fiscal year 16. We had a lot of traction around the child care program and some of the other things that had to be funded to complete fiscal year 15. So there was a bill that was passed. I didn't like the way it was done. We found the money, but we found other money for other things that I didn't think were appropriate, like 10 additional mine inspectors. I don't know that that's an urgent need at the moment, and so I voted no on that bill. But that went into play. And then on Good Friday, in spite of having, given them the money to fix the problem, the governor's office pulled back $200 million in grants statewide to programs. Up here on Howard, the Teen Reach program had to shut down overnight. Actually, to HAC's credit, the Howard Area Community Center, to their credit, instead of shutting down overnight, there was a thought to the humans involved, and they stayed open until Monday so that the kids and the staff could at least just say goodbye to each other. The entire statewide autism program was defunded on World Autism Day within this same piece.
Just like with DECA. So DECA funds agencies, and we all got letters that immediately, today, do not provide any more services. And by the way, DECA gives you the money up front.
Right, so you got to give back.
Send us back the money that we've given you.
Yeah.
So that's some of the things that we're suffering as a direct service provider.
So that was called the Good Friday Massacre. On Wednesday, there was magically $100 million in corporate tax breaks released.
Yeah, please, no more of that. Wonderful.
What's released?
The governor announced them using the budgetary authority in that bad bill I voted against. He was able to give those tax breaks. He used some of that money to create those tax breaks. I am all for incentivizing businesses. Business is not the enemy, but it's not an either or. If you don't have money to feed someone, don't buy your neighbor a filet mignon. Just don't. Use that filet mignon money to buy a bag of beans and some rice and feed 20 people. It is mind-boggling. And so as we move into this budget process, I am fearful for what is ahead, without any doubt. Without any doubt. There are certainly In fact, Matt made, and we have to make more because I went through them. Matt made me 100 buttons last week to take down to Springfield, and I spoke to the Supportive Housing Providers Association clients and gave them all buttons that said things like "I am essential" with the non marked out, because this is all about non-essential services. We're cutting non-essential services. So I took, so Matt designed these buttons that X'd out the non. Do I look non-essential to you? It was a very popular one. So we're going to be making some more of those and taking them down to Springfield again every week. They're blooming like dandelions in the Capitol. Because it is more important than ever. It's very easy to cut numbers. It's hard to cut people. And pushing back to the conversation about House Bill 494 about the bars to reentry, the way we got over that hurdle of it being impossible was for people to look someone in the eye and hear their story and recognize that this wasn't about an abstract line in a statute book, but a human's life who's been impacted by a decision. And it's really easy for us in Springfield to just see it all in those abstract lines in the statute book. So when those cuts are numbers, it's just numbers. You move them around. You move them around on spreadsheet. Things change. When they represent a person, it's a very, very different thing. And the leaders that came down and met with folks and told their stories about their efforts to get back into the workforce did this, changed everything. I think my favorite story from it comes. There's an old experience back when we were trying to raise the minimum wage. There's a member of the General Assembly from DuPage who, upon hearing a story from a formerly homeless woman who works every day hauling 65-pound bins of meat around a factory floor, that she walks to the factory every day because the $2.50 for the bus is a meal. And she told this story about what a difference a minimum wage increase would make for her. And this member, who was sitting right in front of me, like one row ahead of me, asked the woman what her educational credentials were to speak to such an important economic issue affecting the state of Illinois. Now, my reaction was I didn't even realize that I was getting up, and a friend of mine, another Republican, kind of held me back and kept me from doing something stupid. This woman responded so beautifully and eloquently and gracefully that I was crying by the time she was done. Fast forward a couple years, she said that she has learned the hard way the difference between $8 and $10. She has learned through sweat and tears that she can lift 65-pound tubs of meat if that means that she's going to be able to go home and have a meal. And that's plenty education. Thank you very much. And it was just awesome. And everybody's talked about it ever since. I mean, she had a huge impact on people. Well, she went, not even knowing, she went to that same member to talk about House Bill 494 and left with that woman co-sponsoring the bill. And so when I saw her at the Capitol that day, and I had heard that she had gotten this representative to co-sponsor the bill, and that she didn't realize that was who neither one of them remembered the other from that experience, I reminded her that revenge is a dish best served cold. And that she had sure gotten hers. And so it was particularly gratifying to have her have that experience. And to go from being so fully disrespected to being fully respected by the same person. So it was nice. Any other budget questions? Yeah.
I hear rumors because I'm very,
don't we all?
Yeah, because I'm very involved in the present energy bills that are coming around.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard, I sent you this in an email a couple of days ago, but I heard that there was a fund that was originated by ratepayers that I believe that it was in the southern section of these or whatever you call them, these big electricity distribution. There's two in Illinois,
Okay.
and I think it was the southern one, but I'm really not sure. And they were paying part of their rates to go into what is called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. And this Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is badly misnamed, is a fund to support renewable energy like wind, solar in the state of Illinois. And part of their rates were going into that fund. Then I heard that this is not tax money. It doesn't belong to the state. And I heard that it was transferred right over to the state fund and dumped right into the general fund.
No idea.
Oh.
So the renewable portfolio standard isn't actually a fund. So that's part of where my disconnect is. The RPS is about how we distribute energy and how we purchase our energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not, to my knowledge, a specific fund related to the RPS. The RPS is a mess, and we are working on fixing that, because as aggregation came in, it just changed the way that, like, they didn't keep up with each other. But to my knowledge, there's no fund associated with the RPS. But that's something that I'd have to dig into. I'm not familiar with.
I thought that there was a certain proportion of the rates that people were paying for electricity that went into renewable energy for the future.
It's possible. It's not necessarily related to the RPS.
Yeah.
And what I will say is that all of the money that they used to fill the FY15 hole did come from fund sweeps. So there was probably a fund that is somehow related to energy in one way or another that probably was swept, but I don't know the specifics of it.
Okay, so do you
I
like,
think one of them was related to providing subsidies for low-income people for
Yes,
their
the
energy.
LIHEAP fund was one of the things that was touched,
tell
low-income
me
home
what
energy
do you mean by
assistance
a
program.
sweep? What do you mean by a sweep?
So there are several, so we have the general revenue fund, the way the budget is designed. We have GRF, general revenue fund, and then we have many OSFs, other state funds. And they come from all different places. And so the one in particular, so the LIHEAP fund, and I'm not sure what, it's okay, I have 3 children and I think that sounds like music. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. Nobody should ever have to leave with a kid for me. The LIHEAP fund, and I'm not sure exactly where the money comes from, it probably comes from several sources, including ratepayers, is the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. It exists so that people can apply for emergency assistance to help pay their energy bills. We heard there was some talk about it this week because it was said that it was swept because there was such a huge surplus in it. Now, the idea that there could ever be a surplus in a fund that we always have trouble getting people into is a little suspect. But so that's one that was swept. There's another called the Motor Vehicle
But when you
Theft
say
Prevention.
swept, they took the money
So they-
out and just put it in a general fund.
Yeah, so they sweep the money from these other state funds, put it into GRF, and use it to pay the bills. And that happens routinely in small ways sometimes. I mean, it's not something that happens every year, but it has happened under many different kinds of administrations for many different reasons. Sometimes with reimbursement, sometimes without. But it does happen. The Motor Vehicle Theft Prevention Fund is another one where, there's $1. Everybody with an auto insurance plan, $1 of your rates goes into this Motor Vehicle Theft Prevention Fund that's supposed to fund police and prosecution and law enforcement efforts around prosecuting and preventing motor vehicle theft. That got swept. So there's a lot of different funds. There were many, and we saw it an hour before it passed. I saw enough to know I didn't want to vote for it. But we can look into this question you've got a little bit more deeply and get back to you, because I'm not certain about that piece of it. Yes?
I know some of the budget cuts were made in the light of saving money, and I work at the intersection of justice and law and mental health. So even before C4,
You're going to get hit in all 3 places.
right? Yeah, it's been ongoing. But
Yeah.
regardless of that, even before C4 closed, there's been an increase in the hospitalizations and other costs associated from not being able to access care. So in terms of the budget, in terms of political assessment of cost, what's being done to better understand and calculate that so the true cost compared with savings of a slash and burn budget is
start with one really important thing to be mindful of. This is the governor's proposed budget. It's not the budget yet. We have until the end of May and perhaps beyond to pass a budget. You know, without revenue, we simply can't move forward. We lost half a year of revenue in the FY15 budget. We're going to lose a full year with the income tax rollback this year. We're in a very, very dangerous game of chicken right now. The governor is refusing to contemplate revenue, period. It's that simple. You know, we as Democratic members, and Greg Harris is the Human Services Appropriations Chair, continue to drive the narrative around recognizing the cuts that equal costs, frankly, and that's a really important way to phrase it. You know, you can cut. It's like one of the things when we made the Medicaid cuts and we eliminated adult dental, there was an immediate increase in other health costs associated with that. People were going into emergency rooms for dental care, so we restored adult dental. You know, the 4-drug limit was another one where there was more costs associated with administering it than there wasn't just letting people have the meds they needed. You know, so we undid those things. He's proposing to put those back into place. The Senate's doing something kind of fantastic around. They're having these hearings. They're having human services budget hearings all over the state, and getting fantastic turnout at every place they've gone, because we've never really done that. You know, we've never really made the budget a living, accessible document to the people that we serve. And I think that, you know, the fact that Senator Staines and Senator Kwiatkowski are doing that has had a huge impact, and is really driving the agenda and driving that narrative. You know, the earlier question of, you know, if we're going to save money, you know, in some of these programs, where's that money going to go? Well, right now it's just going to go into the hole because we're in such a hole. But we should be doing it in such a way that, you know, if we reduce the prison population by 25%, those dollars should go directly into the services in the community that are going to make sure those people stay out of the prisons. You know, I'd love to see that happen.
Can you tell us?
Hi, how are you?
Can you tell us what Staines and Kwiatkowski did to make the budget more accessible?
Well, but they're literally holding hearings, budget hearings, all over the state. They are bringing the meetings to communities, bringing agency heads into those hearings, and, you know, really mandating that they show up. You know, you have to come and defend your budget in front of the people we serve. They were down in Edwardsville last week. I'm not sure what the schedule includes. We've had a few in Chicago already, and probably we'll have more. And they have gotten great turnout from folks, and it shows there's interest. You know, it's really fascinating that, you know, that many people really do want to be engaged in it. Yes, in the back.
Kelly, what's the status of the fair state income tax? The progressive graduated state income tax, I believe, would require a constitutional amendment.
It would.
But it's been kind of bounced around and talked, and I know we've supported.
Yes.
It's been talked about for a long time, but where is it at now?
Okay, so.
And secondly, what about Mike Manchin's idea of taxing
The millionaire tax?
3% surcharge on any income over $1 million a year.
Okay, so for those watching at home, he's asking about the constitutional amendment on the progressive income tax, or the fair tax as it was called. We came short. So in order to amend the Constitution, Illinois is relatively unique. We're one of very few states with a flat income tax, and we're one of even fewer who mandate it in our Constitution. And so in order to move from our flat income tax to an income tax that is progressive based on your income, we would have to amend our Constitution. That requires a supermajority vote in both chambers to get that constitutional amendment on the ballot, and then a supermajority vote of voters to approve it. And so the first opportunity that we could even conceivably have now. I mean, we failed last year, and I literally, I was whipping votes until quite literally the last minute. I was in an office at 4:59 begging for one last vote, and I couldn't get it. So the next opportunity would be on the 2016 November ballot. And it's a very unlikely prospect. Worth still trying, absolutely, but if we couldn't get it with a progressive governor, it's going to be really hard under the current political climate. Also keeping in mind, and this is something that, even last year when we were trying to get it done and thought we might have a shot at it, once that happens, once those three heavy lifts happen, we get it through the House with a supermajority, get it through the Senate with a supermajority, get it past the voters with a supermajority, we then have to come back to the General Assembly and craft a tax code. It does. So there's still more work to be done even after we amend the Constitution. So that piece remains really the critical thing we need to do this right. But it's a multi-step process that's going to take a while. Speaker Madigan suggested as an alternative a surcharge on incomes over $1 million. That's gotten some more attention of late. Again, we would need to get a supermajority vote in order to overcome a veto. We do have 71 Democrats in the House, but not all Democrats are alike. To that, I actually, even though it doesn't work out in my favor this time, I say bravo. Part of the problem with the Republican caucus is they really do march in lockstep, and they really do have a litmus test, and that's why there are so few of them right now. The fact that we have folks from all over the ideological spectrum makes us a more robust and healthy body, frankly. And so, I would love it if we could all come together on this one thing, but there are a couple of Democrats in our chamber who are simply not going to vote for a tax increase. We will need Republican votes to get that done.
What about restoring the temporary income tax that ended that
right.
First?
So those are really the three items on the menu. Restoration of the temporary income tax back up to the 5% level. Again, we would need Republican votes for it, which means that the governor's going to have to come around on revenue. This is I talked about the terrifying game of chicken that we're playing right now. That's the game we're in. And I hate using the word game because it's not one, but that's really what's happening. Who's going to blink first? He wants right to work. He wants, workers' comp reform. He wants tort reform. He wants, pension reform. He wants things that are harmful to the middle class in exchange for not killing the middle class. What are we going to do? That is the path we're on. That's where we're headed. We have to have revenue, and he'll even acknowledge that. But it comes down to what's it going to take to get them willing to push the green button. Yes.
How big of an impact do you think the upcoming Supreme Court decision on the previous pension reform bill is going to have on this upcoming budget debate? Well,
a huge one, because the governor's proposed budget actually factors for savings.
$2 billion.
Yeah. We didn't even factor for those savings. We've been budgeting for the full pension payment. He's actually not budgeting for the full pension payment in this budget. The decision will make a huge difference, no question. And I anticipate we'll hear relatively soon. The decision in Quinn versus Harris on the health care benefit question really telegraphed what it seemed like the Supreme Court was going to say about SB1, the old SB1, the pension reform bill. I think it's highly unlikely that law is going to be upheld, which, in terms of how we have been budgeting and how I think the Speaker intends for the House budget that we pass to advance, I don't think he's planning on a budget that anticipates those savings. I think that we'll be budgeting the full pension payment, which means bigger hole.
Well, what will it take for some Republicans to support revenue increases? Because Rauner keeps saying, oh, everybody's going to share the burden. Well, I haven't seen rich people share the burden. My thing is, he could raise $20 million in 2 days with him and his two rich buddies to have a fund to protect Republicans and some Democrats
Well,
too.
ironically enough, it's not to protect anyone.
It's to bribe well.
There are two $20 million funds. He's actually got two of them. Two mints in one. There's his Republican super PAC that he is using as a hammer over the heads of that Republican caucus. Step out of line and we're going to have a problem, is what he has said. And now there's another one. There's a Democratic super PAC for the same reason. It's going to take a lot more people who don't care. Come at me. I'm going to vote my values. It's a game of chicken. When you've got your party leader threatening to primary you, it's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this. It's going to be hard to see how this breaks.
You mean supporting somebody else in the primary?
I mean, that's what I'm hearing from my Republican colleagues. I can't do that. I'll get a primary.
Well, have some guts once in a while. That's what they're there for. I mean, they're being paid. All of you're being paid to save the state, not just think about your own skin.
So, I mean, ultimately, the question has become, what portion of his turnaround agenda, the right to work zones, that all these various pieces, is it going to take before he gives in on revenue? Well, for someone like me, I'm going to stand up for the middle class. Period. So we're all, we all have to give something. Without it, and I've shown my ability to compromise, and I'm more than happy to find a way to compromise. But we have to stop putting dollar signs on humans and valuing one over the other. If we can find a way to do that,
and if he wants to union bash, he can go to Indiana.
And just so we're clear on the stakes of this game of chicken, correct me if I'm understanding this wrong, but basically if we get to on or around July 15th without a budget approved, that's when the government starts shutting down, essentially, right? Or is that not correct?
Well, July 1 is the beginning of the fiscal year.
Sorry, July 1.
July 1 is the beginning of the fiscal year. We have to pass a budget technically by May 31st. If we go past May 31st, it requires a supermajority to pass it. So that means 71. The speaker has said that, unlike in the last, every budget I've been a part of, there have only been Democratic votes on those budgets. There has not been a bipartisan budget in my time in the House. And in most cases, the Republicans have not participated in the budget working group meetings. So what we do is we have these hearings, but then we also meet literally with our pencils and our books and spreadsheets and figure it out in these working groups. And the Republicans have not been working in the working groups in previous years. This year, there are going to have to be, first of all, it's tradition that the governor's budget is carried by a member of his party. So it's likely that the sponsor of the budget will be a Republican. So there, you start from that. Will it be a 50-50 vote? Will there be 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans voting for it? I don't know the answer to that.
They all had all the Republicans on the FY15.
Yes, they did indeed. The fund sweep bill was all 47 of them. But it remains to be seen how this is going to work out. We're really at the very beginning of that process. We haven't set our revenue levels yet. We haven't, we're really just at the beginning of it.
But just so everyone's clear, what happens if we get to that July 1st or beyond date without a budget?
In practical terms, and it's only happened a couple times and none since I've been there, but we would have shutdown. We would go down to essential services only. DOC would continue to operate. Some other agencies could continue to operate at skeleton levels, but there would be no money in the state coffers to pay bills. That's not, first of all, it's a terrible scenario. It's also not likely. I mean, we could also go to continuing resolutions where we could continue to operate at current levels. You can do those in small chunks of time, which you see at the federal level. You get a month to keep working. You get, that kind of thing could happen. so, you know, but it's a real risk. It's a very real risk. Anyone else?
Well, our tax revenues anticipated to go up if the economy is better, or
Yes.
you know,
Yeah, and
well-
actually revenues are ahead of projections right now. Not a lot, but they are ahead of projections. One of the other things I should have talked about is we were talking about the progressive tax or the millionaire surcharge or the restoration of the income tax is this question of looking at how we tax services. Because right now our sales tax is based on goods and not services. Again, that's something worth looking at, but again, should be done in a way that's thoughtful. You know, there's a difference between renting a limo and getting your kid's haircut, things like that. So, you know, if it can be done in a thoughtful way, I think that's one more likely area of sort of easier agreement.
what about taxing retirement income, say over a certain level? That would,
You know, people tend to see taxing seniors as the third rail.
but over again, putting over
Right,
over
absolutely.
100,000 or something.
And
you know,
we are
putting
one
it
of
back.
very few
Yeah,
states. I can't
yeah.
remember. It's a
It is. It's
surprisingly
very
small
few.
number, but we don't tax retirement income at all. And so that's, but you know, folks tend to hear that and go, oh. So I don't know, but that, I mean, that does get talked about periodically as well. Yes.
Oh, this is going to be kind of irrelevant. I have
Nothing is.
I just wanted people to try to remember a person who got primary, and that was Christine Segalis when Tammy Duckworth was put in her spot by the Democratic Party, and she lost the support of the Democratic Party. That's just an obvious example.
Yeah.
But that was for federal Congress, not for
Yeah.
the state house.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
we're talking. Yeah, exactly.
But it happens. Yeah.
What percentage, what other states charge tax on services? I'm just kind of curious. Are we like part of the minority?
I think we are, but again, I don't know those numbers. But again, yeah, we are. We have a among the narrowest tax bases in the country. We also have among the smallest state governments per capita in the country. So, you know, when we hear, you know, talk of how, you know, bloated the state government is and all that, we actually are in the bottom third in terms of per capita spending on state government in the country.
Oh, and I
But don't we also have many more local and
Oh,
other
we
levels
have-
of government?
We
than everybody
have
else?
absolutely.
Like 8,000 or
We
something?
have enough units of local government to run a country. Absolutely, and you know and that's another place that's really hard to do. Trying to consolidate those mosquito abatement districts and library boards and this board and that board, even when they're contiguous. I mean, you know, Evanston did a referendum because Evanston Township and the city of Evanston were completely coterminous. Evanston did a ballot initiative to eliminate the Evanston Township government and absorb it into the city of Evanston government to save money. It passed overwhelmingly. The city government, the township government, all agreed. Everybody wanted to do it, and the state law didn't allow it.
Well, not everybody in Evanston was for it.
That's
Not
true.
everybody in
That's
Evanston.
true.
You know,
This
they
is true.
wanted the
This is true.
supervisor's money. The city wanted to get their hands on it.
But then we had to change the state law to do it, and then they had to go back and do it again after we changed the state law. And you know, there was just a huge and heated debate around the same issue. DuPage was able, after the Evanston vote, DuPage was able to do a similar thing that allowed them to consolidate some of their units of local government. There was a bill this week to expand it to Lake and McHenry County. It was a huge floor battle. It was, you know, one of the most arcane areas of law, brought on the most passionate debate of the week. But that, you know, so this is an intense area of law. Each of these little units of government represents someone's zone. Yeah, fiefdoms. In some cases, fiefdoms. Some cases not. But it, you know, when you're used to going to your mosquito abatement board, you want to go to your mosquito abatement board, I guess. You know. So people take it very seriously, and it's different for us in the city because we don't have that. So you know, it sounds very antiquated to us. But as I talk to other members, you know, this is very. It gets heated.
But I thought Robin Gable, who's my rep,
Yeah.
had said that the percentage of the state budget coming from corporate taxes is down from what it had been in the past. So, and of course, Rauner sounds like he wants to cut,
Even more. Yeah.
more. So what is the situation with corporate taxes?
I don't know specific answers on that, but it is true. That is, it has been going down as we keep putting in the incentives and whatnot have gone there, not, and they're mostly to the larger businesses. We don't do a good job of incentivizing small businesses. We don't do a good job of giving them access to the same benefits that we give. Nobody ever offered a bailout package to women and children first to keep them from moving to Indiana. I mean, we don't do that.
So I'm wondering,
They did find new owners, but
so when we talk about all the cuts and we talk about playing chicken and we talk about how fearful, and what are the options when we look at this next FY15 or I'm sorry FY16 budget? What are the options specifically for human services? What are is it beyond speaking to your legislator? If your legislator is supportive of this work, what's the next step to make sure that the cuts are not that detrimental to key and critical services?
I love that question because, so often, I mean, some of you, I've met with you about multiple human services projects, and so some of you have heard me sing this song before. Everybody in this room knows someone who is represented by someone who doesn't sing out of the choir book I'm singing out of. Whether it's your cousin or your old high school teacher or your mother's best friend who lives in Wheaton or McHenry County or downstate Illinois, they need to talk about their cousin's brother's friend who's going to lose access to their mental health services. They need to talk about, the Franklin County meth program. They need to talk about, their granddaughter whose school is going to lose their special education funding. It needs to go beyond this bubble.
I wonder about that, but also you're speaking to values, and I wonder if they vote values or they vote what's good business practice. Because if you're speaking a different language to someone who's already not supporting you based on a human value that you should already have, I don't know if speaking from a personal perspective from human values really is firm.
It can be. It's because it's very, very easy to, as I said earlier, to think of numbers and not people. So piercing that veil is critical. Piercing through that idea that that these are numbers on a spreadsheet, these aren't people, is critical. Using the good business sense argument is also important. And so when you're talking about your little cousin who's going to lose access to her early childhood education or her early intervention systems, you can then talk about how much more it's going to cost when she doesn't get the treatment she needs and ends up in inpatient care. So it's all the same. Ultimately, it all circles back to the same thing. There has to be a person attached to that dollar. Yes.
I just saw advocacy. I'm wondering if the legislators are looking at these different programs in an informed way, and what lens are they looking to validate programs or move forward with including them in FY16? So specifically, if the program is evidence-based versus the program that's not, is that going to carry more weight on legislation as people self-advocate?
It depends. It depends on who you're talking to. The legislature is made up of individuals too. And so data is good, but sometimes data brings down the curtain, and so then there's a personal story attached to that. So it's all of the above. And it really depends on who you're talking to, whether what matters more, and being able to sort of gauge your situation as you go in.
Okay, since you're in this room, I'm talking, evidence-based practice, is that going to make a difference? Is that going to carry a lot of weight with you in advocating for these non-essential and essential positions?
Absolutely. I mean, I come out of a grant making background, so I absolutely understand the importance of evidence-based programming. But again, we're dealing with each of the appropriations committees have about 20 different people on them. Everybody's going to have their pet, and I hate for that to be the way that it ends up going. There needs to be a much more coalesced approach to saving these services. Rather, don't just save me. Yes.
I mean, But if you use that approach, or the economic, or the value approach, I mean, if you had an integrated approach that with every mental health center that's closed, you have just increased incarceration. With every teen center that's closed, you've increased juvenile delinquency. And so there's no money saved. I mean, isn't that possible to get that across to the legislature?
I mean, it just seems like basic
It does.
logic to me, and that so, you know, that is our challenge, you know, because we are dealing with folks, you know, at some level there are many who don't care about that. They just care about the last line of the spreadsheet.